Professor Neale from the University of Leeds, who's going to be talking about the Timescapes project. And I guess it'll be quite interesting because, as some of you may know if you've been to the website or heard it in other ways, that Timescapes is really a very large qualitative project. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it develops over the coming years, because usually we think of qualitative research as being quite small scale, and this is at least medium scale and perhaps large scale as well. I think there are about 400 people going to be followed, which is a very large number for qualitative research. The project itself comes, I think, at sort of a coalition of a number of other qualitative projects that have developed into Timescapes. And one of these was the Inventing Adulthood study, which had young people in Northern Ireland that were interviewed over a number of years. And so that's still part of Timescapes now. So there's a link between Timescapes and Northern Ireland. And Bren's going to be talking about the project, but also, I think, from a wider point of view, questions of time and thinking about time and how to use qualitative research to look at questions of time, which I think should be, I have great hopes to be enlightened and find an interesting discussion. So no more ado, I'll turn over to Bren.
All right, thanks, Bob. Right. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Can you all hear me all right? It's very nice to be here. As Bob said, what I'd like to do is tell you a bit about the Timescapes study, but also to focus on, if you like, the conceptual drivers for the research we're doing, which is the notion of time. And as you can see here, I've suggested, following the work of Barbara Adam, that we're in the middle of a temporal turn in social inquiry. And I want to explore that a little bit and invite us all to think about why that is happening and why it's important. So without further ado, a little bit about the Timescapes study, Changing Relationships and Identities Through the Life course. It's the first major qualitative longitudinal study to be funded in the UK, and it's initially for a 5-year period, although we hope we'll run on beyond that. And again, as Bob said, a major scaling up of qualitative longitudinal research, because it's got actually a long tradition, particularly emanating from social anthropology and in oral history. But like much qualitative research, it happens in pockets. It's almost a cottage industry, and bringing together a number of projects into an integrated whole, which is what we've tried to do, enables it to sit alongside the rather more well-funded and perhaps more well-respected quantitative studies that are in operation. And that's the point about, as I've put here, the idea is that we can enrich the portfolio of longitudinal research in the UK. We have a number of really large, really major national level quantitative data sets running, but we have none that are qualitative. So this is what I hope would be the first of many. So part of what we're doing is creating the Timescapes archive, a national level data set for sharing and reuse. And I'll say a little bit about the fact that what we're about here is seeing research and archiving as integrated processes. And Timescapes is being run by a consortium of researchers from 5 universities. That's Leeds, South Bank, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and the Open University. So we have a sort of geographical spread with, as Bob said, some Northern Ireland links through one of the projects. So what is Timescapes about? Well, the substantive topics that we're dealing with, it's about the dynamics of personal relationships and identities. It's about family life, intimacy, friendship, intergenerational care and support. And what we're doing is we've brought together, and we have 7 empirical projects running, and they span the life course. So there are 2 projects on young lives. One focuses on siblings and friendships amongst children. Another is a cohort study tracking a group of teenagers. They're all the same age. We started them off at 13 and we hope to follow them through to the age of 23 to see how their lives unfold. Then we have 3 projects on midlife experiences, one on motherhood, one on fatherhood, one on work-life balance in families where there are young children. And then 2 projects in older life, one focusing on grandparenthood, and one focusing on the oldest generation. What does that mean to be the oldest generation? And I have to say, when we were seeking our funding, there was enormous concern about sample attrition. People were saying, but your sample will die. And we said, well, yes, but how, that's that's okay. We need to be able to explore end-of-life experiences. So anyway, they gave us the money to do it, so that's good. One of the key conceptual tools that we're engaging with, is the notion of the life course. As a temporal construct, it links biological processes of aging with the social processes of growing up, forming and transforming relationships, bearing and rearing children, growing older and dying. So that's what we're framing it in. Part of what we're about is producing practical knowledge, because in my view, one of the key rationales for doing social research is to make a difference in the real world. So although we're dealing with lovely concepts of time and exploring that, there is a practical edge to what we're doing. So we have these policy themes. We're looking at, in particular, at intergenerational care and support, the long-term resourcing of families, issues of work-life balance, social support, social exclusion. We're working in some very poor communities, for example. And we know that our family lives and personal relationships have enormous implications for our life chances, our health and well-being. So we're trying to unpick that, understand that a little bit more. The methods that we're using, we were funded under a qualitative longitudinal initiative, and as I suppose a rough definition of qualitative longitudinal research is that it is rich qualitative inquiry conducted through and or in relation to time. So what we're about is charting changes, continuity, endurance, transitions, turning points, and so on. Those lovely dynamic concepts, process concepts. And partly what we're doing is prospectively tracking people as their lives unfold, perhaps through particular policy landscapes that are themselves changing, and also retrospectively documenting people's lives through the generation of life histories. And I want to suggest that both of those are really very important when we're working through time. The retrospective, I think, is really important because we might say that we can only understand life backwards. In fact, I think Kierkegaard said that. He said we can only live life forward, but we can only understand our lives backwards. And another key feature of the study, as I've alluded to already, the link between research and archiving. Out of those 7 empirical projects, we'll be generating a great deal of rich data, which we're drawing together to create an archive linked to the live study. And it's a continuous process of archiving, so that as the data comes in, it goes into the archive. So we're, if you like, documenting the unfolding story of people's lives as the study progresses. The resource that we're setting up is a specialist resource. It's thematically driven, therefore very different, if you like, from the generic Qualidata, a national level qualitative archive. And our archive is based on the principles of data sharing and reuse. I suppose the thing I would say there is, any of you that have done qualitative research, we are obliged to put our data into Qualidata. And it's like an administrative process that's tacked onto the end of our research. We do our research, and then, right, we've got to get the data ready, and we ship it off somewhere, wholesale kind of dumping of the data somewhere else. We make sure that we've dealt with it and used it as much as we can before we give it away. That's the kind of ethos that we're still working in. And we're trying to bite the bullet and get beyond this and say that actually what we're doing is seeing archiving as a research output, a dissemination strategy in its own right. The production of a data set is part of our dissemination. It's an important output. Not a technical task tacked on the end because it's intrinsic to what we do. And that when the people that will use our archive are not just people that come in to use our data, but they're attached to the study. So they will be out in the field gathering data that they will put into the archive, and then their analysis will be enriched by linking their new data with existing data. So it is really based on the principle of data sharing. And it seems to me that that might be a good way forward, in that people are very interested in reusing data if they see it as part of a live study in that way. I think one of the problems with a generic archive like Qualidata is that relatively few researchers wish to just do secondary analysis, if you like, on somebody else's data. 'Cause that's still how people think of it. Anyways, more things to say about that. I mean, there's all sorts of issues. We all do this thing of turning people into data, and big ethical issues around that. But we're trying to do it in a way that preserves people's vitality and their agency. We're working with multimedia data, for example, not just interview transcripts, but photographs and videos. We're trying to work with notions of situated ethics, and one of the things that we'd like to do over the 5 years is to produce an ethics guideline for doing qualitative longitudinal research. So we're very actively engaged with the whole ethical issue of what we're doing. But more to be said about that if we're interested to follow that up. What I wanted to do now, if you like, is to pull back a bit and look at the two key enterprises that I see that Timescapes is about. And one related to the qualitative dimension of our work and the other to the longitudinal dimension. Partly what we're about in Timescapes is, if you like, promoting the authenticity of personal lives and human agency. And any of you who've done qualitative research, you'll know this inside out, that these are important things to do. We don't do enough to persuade the rest of the world that this is important. We still have a job to do there. Personal lives, the micro world of individual identities and practices, values, meanings, choices, worldviews. It's really important. Agency, the capacity to act, to interact, to influence the shape of one's own life, the lives of people around one, and to impact on broader social structures. And we can get at those through qualitative explorations. And we often hear now, and it's often written, that we have an ethnographic turn, a biographical turn, a narrative turn in social inquiry. And all of these approaches share something in common. They are all able to address important how and why questions about people's lives, the textures of personal lives, the agency of individuals and groups. So I think that's a really important, I don't want to lose track of the fact that we still, as I say, have a long way to go to promote that, to say these are authentic matters. They are not anecdotal. To understand the subjectivities of people is very important. And I've pulled out a quote here from Prue Chamberlain, whose work I like and admire very much. She said, "We can only recognise and understand a life when we understand not only what it has in common with other lives, but when we can grasp its individuality, the way in which a recognisable individual has made sense of, interpreted, adapted to, or suffered his or her life circumstances. In short, when we understand our subjects as persons like ourselves." So, okay, that's one side of our enterprise, if you like. And the other side is the temporal turn. I've put temporal turn in sociology, but it's cross-disciplinary, actually. It's temporal turn in social inquiry generally. In Timescapes, we are engaging with time conceptually, substantively, methodologically. It flows through every dimension of the work that we do. We're trying to make tangible something that's really quite intangible. And time isn't just the medium through which we do our research. It is a topic of inquiry in its own right. And what I want to do now is just pull out two different ways in which we might think about time, which, if you like, map onto a quantitative and quantitative way of viewing the world. I suppose our conventional understanding of time is that it is linear. It is cumulative, it's invariably moving forward. And we can see time, if we think about it quantitatively, as chronology, as sequence, as duration, as interval. Okay? But there's another whole way of viewing time, which is to see it as something that's much more fluid, it's discursive, recursive, it's multidimensional, it's infinitely varied. So if you like, here we're moving into the realms of a qualitative understanding of time as a social construct. And just to give you a flavour of how those two models might map onto how we view the life course, we have rather conventional understandings of the life course as the life cycle. Okay, it's seen as something that's very structured with predefined life stages, and these have been traditionally in the literature seen as benchmarks against which to measure development and behaviour. Classic examples, the work of Piaget and Kohlberg in their work with children, who posited a number of stages through which children progress in order to reach adulthood. And more recently, the work of Berthoud a book called 7 Years in the Lives of British Families, which came out of the British Household Panel Survey. Very interesting book. But Bertou suggests there are 8 stages through life that people go through. So, a really quite structured way of viewing time. But then we can think about a rather more fluid notion of the life course. As Harris says here, the negotiation of a passage through an unpredictably changing environment. And I really like what Holstein and Gubrium have to say about this. They say the life course does not simply unfold before and around us, rather we actively organise the flow, pattern and direction of experience as we navigate the social terrain of everyday lives. So that's the sort of much more fluid notion of the life course that we're working with in our study. And once we start working with these really fluid notions of time, all sorts of interesting dimensions of time can come to the fore for us to start to think about and grapple with. And I've pulled out a number here that I really like. The first is actually a very old piece of writing now from Bakhtin, who was writing in the late 1930s. And he has this lovely notion of chronotopes, which is basically the intersection of time and space. And he sees, this connectedness of temporal and spatial relationships as the key to understanding our social selves, if you like. Another way to think of it is the intersection of where and when as the key mechanisms for grasping the significance and meaning of events. So added on to our lovely how and why questions that we can explore qualitatively, we can add the where and the when through time and space. And if you think about it, whenever you describe any significant thing that happens, we always need to locate it somewhere. We need to locate it in space and we need to locate it in time. So those are important things. Bakhtin is actually writing about chronotopes in the concept of literature, but it's interesting to apply those ideas in the social sciences. A second interesting view of time is that provided by Lemke, who has a whole theories built around the notion of time scales. It's actually an ecological model of time. He sets it out as a table, actually. And he says what we're doing is simultaneously inhabiting many different time scales, from the microscopic functions of the cells in our bodies right up to the cosmic history of the universe. And it's interesting because at that microscopic level, time moves so infinitely fast that we can't comprehend it. Infinite speed going on there. And then, of course, at the cosmic end of things, if you think about the Ice Age or so on, time is moving so infinitely slowly that it appears to stand still. And in between those two extremes, you have a whole range of different timescales that we are simultaneously inhabiting. And he says, it's really important for us to understand how we simultaneously inhabit these timescales. I mean, I like to think of this, and I've applied these ideas just through the notion of understanding the pace of time. Because, and I can give you an example of this with the work that I've done with children of divorced parents. Change itself is neither inherently good nor bad. The nature of the change, of course, is very important, but the pace of change is really very important if we're going to understand, how children adapt to different family structures. And I really like this quote from Oscar Wilde, so I've pulled it out here for you. One can live for years, sometimes without living at all, and then all of life comes crowding into one single hour. And that leads into the notion of turning points, critical moments, defining moments, epiphanies, these moments that move us on in life, that create changes in our personal biographies and indeed in wider historical processes. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But those ideas are from Norman Denzin, Anthony Giddens and others. Sorry. In Timescapes itself, we're working with 3 particular views of time, and I'm going to say a little bit about each of them. But I suppose the starting point here is to talk about the concept of timescapes itself, which is a term we've borrowed from the work of Barbara Adam. And I think if any of you are interested in social theories of time, Barbara is a wonderful place to start. She's our eminent sort of time theorist in the UK. But she wrote a book called Timescapes, and actually she was looking at the environment and how we can understand how time is imprinted on the environment, and she was very interested in the impact of environmental change and so on. But I suppose you could think about escape as a vista, a view of the world that changes in kaleidoscopic ways depending upon the position of the observer and depending upon the disposition of the observer. So we can again apply that lovely temporal metaphor to time. And we're working with 3 timescapes in our study: biographical time, generational time, and historical time. And I shall say a little bit about each of those. But the main thing is we're interested in how these 3 timescapes intersect through the life course and in the way individuals live their lives. And the starting point, I think, as well as the work of Barbara Adam here, is some wonderful insights from C. Wright Mills. He says we can't hope to understand society unless we have a prior understanding of the relationship between history and biography. So I'll start off with biographical time and say a little bit about that. I mean, obviously we all know about the concept of biography and what it means, that we're, if you like, focusing on an individual life that flows through the lifespan from birth to death, shaped by and interacting with a multitude of personal, relational and historical events and circumstances along the way. Again, Chamberlain talks about this in terms of a life journey. But I think one of the interesting things is if we know that an individual moves from point A to point B, how did they get there? And what was the journey like along the way? Were there diversions or hold-ups? Was the journey a matter of choice? Was the destination planned? What was it like to reach that destination? Again, I'm using spatial metaphors to describe a temporal journey here. But those are the sorts of things we can try to understand when we're focusing on biography. And again, the direction and pace of change, the momentum of change in people's lives. What moves individuals on? And this is again where we get back to the turning points, the critical moments in people's lives. I like that notion of epiphany, a sudden intuitive leap of understanding, especially through an ordinary but striking occurrence. And having been out in the field and interviewed people, often they'll say, there was this particular moment where I knew things were going to be different. And sometimes these moments they're not hugely significant in the broader, our broader understanding of things. And I'll give you an example from interviewing a 6-year-old, and she'd been drawing a timeline for me. This is one of the mechanisms that we often use to get at time. We'll ask people to construct we just draw a timeline and ask them to put on the timeline particular events that are important. And then we might extend it at the next interview, and then they might come back and revise the timeline. But this particular child had put on her timeline the arrival and then the deaths of her pets, and this was what was significant for her. But when her last rabbit died, her social life completely changed, because she then developed new hobbies which took her outside the home, and she went into a completely different set of social relationships, and it was a really big change in her life, all emanating from the death of her rabbit. But alongside all these notions around change and turning points, we also need to hang on to how people, if you like, stay the same. Because actually staying the same is hard work. It's not really staying the same. It's about endurance. It's about sustaining relationships. That can be really, really hard work. How do people bide their time? What are the ebbs and flows of time in people's lives? And that relates to their particular circumstances and the nature of their relationships and so on. And we can unpick that a little bit too. Generational time. I think this is I was talking about the links between biography and history, but there is this sort of meso level in between, if you like. And this is how individuals are part of an age or generational convoy, which is moving collectively through time. We relate to our own generation, but we're also relating to the generation, if you like, above us, the generation of our parents and grandparents, how we relate to the generations below us, our children and grandchildren. So if you like, this is a micro-dimensional relationship of time which is bound up with the shifting structures of kinship and family and also community. Age and more broadly generational categories such as child and young person and old age, these are shifting. They're fluid as people cross generational boundaries and as life course categories themselves expand or contract. We know, for example, that there's an idea now about the fourth age, deep old age, which is an expanding category, and it creates a whole raft of really significant questions about what happens for people in the later stages of life. The notion of youth is an expanding category. And then what happens for the generation in between, with increasing dependencies maybe for people at older and younger ends of the life course. And Hockey and James have said here, we have to account for changes in the shape of the life course itself. It is not only individuals who change, but the categories that they inhabit. So that's generational time. And then our third category that we're working with is historical time, and this is how individuals locate themselves in different epochs and in relation to different external events and circumstances and environments, both locally and globally. And those external events can be, things that if you like, are really obvious to us all. I mean, what's been happening in America over the last 2 or 3 weeks, really important historical moments. The fact that we're now entering a recession, that's going to affect all of us in various ways. But also it's also this varied policy landscape that half of us not even aware that we're inhabiting, but it really does affect our lives in all kinds of ways. And it's how these policy landscapes intersect with critical moments for individuals, which is one of the key things that we want to pick up on when we're looking at historical time. And there's other ways of thinking about historical time as well, how it links to industrial time and seasonal time, how we mark the passage of time and the passage of our lives through clocks and the seasons. One of the researchers in Timescapes, Bill Bytheway, has done a wonderful study on birthdays and the significance of birthdays as markers of our passage through the life course, but also as key events when we create and recreate our relationships with significant others. I wanted to just say a word about past, present and future, because these are, again, really important concepts, I think, for us to hang on to. And first of all, the relationship between past and present. We all have a personal past and we all have a situated present. And I think increasingly we're beginning to see the past as a subjective resource. We have a heritage, we have memories, we have our past relationships that we use in the ongoing construction of our social identities and as a resource to allow us to move into the future. And I think it's interesting for us to get away from the idea that our past is somehow fixed and immutable, it's just there, history as given. People are continually overwriting their biographies and reinterpreting the past through the lens of the present day. And again, just to get that back to some kind of, research reality, it's very interesting when we give people their timelines and they revisit them and say, actually, I've just realised, because I've just, for example, experienced a death, that the death of somebody else earlier on in my life was very significant, and I now can see the link between those two events, that sort of thing. So the relationship between past and present, but also present and future. We all have unknown futures, but they are scripted to various degrees. Sometimes not scripted at all, sometimes highly scripted. I don't know if any of you have seen any of the 7-Up documentary programmes on TV, which Michael Apted has filmed over many, many years. It started in the 1950s, where he interviewed about 15 7-year-olds from highly varied class backgrounds, and then he went and interviewed them every 7 years, and they're now 49. The last TV show about them, they raised 49. And it's wonderful seeing these 7-year-olds from very different class backgrounds talking to the camera, and the boys from the public schools are saying, I will be going to Marlborough, and then I shall be going on to Christchurch. And the little girls from the East End of London saying, I might like to be a bus driver, or I may work in Woolworths, or I might just get married. But it's different ways in which we orientate ourselves to the future, and that's the key point I want to make here. We all, as we overwrite our biographies, do this in such varied ways. So these orientations to the future are really important. We can think about this as beginnings and endings, or changes or not changes, continuities. Are we concerned with big opportunities, or what are the constraints? Do we approach the future with a sense of foresight or foreboding? Are we focusing on our hopes or our fears? Do we plan for the future? Do we drift into it? Do we have choices, or do we have no choice at all? So these are really important things, I think, for us to grasp. one of the things that we can do in Timescapes, because we're tracking individuals through time, is it may be that we can compare projected futures with the actuality of people's lives. And I think I was telling you that one of the projects in our study, we're tracking a group of teenagers who are now 15, and we've just given them an exercise which is to write about how they see their lives at the age of 25. And we've got some wonderful accounts back from them. But as we're tracking them, we'll be able to see whether those projections pan out or not. And we've asked them, why it is that they've seen their lives like this. What's the source of their ideas? And actually, what we're hoping to do with that particular data is link it to an exercise that was conducted in 1969, I think it was, under the National Child Development Study. I don't know if any of you know that. It was a 1957 cohort involving, I think, up to about 20,000 young people, all of whom were born in 1 week in May in 1957. And when that cohort reached the age of 11, they were all given an essay question to write about their lives at the age of 25. And this is a wonderful historical resource which has never been analysed properly, but there are some researchers, Ginny Morrow being one, and Jane Elliott, now working on some analysis of that. And of course it's lovely rich historical data these days, and we'll hope that we'll be able to link the kind of accounts that we're getting from young people nowadays with what was said in 1969. And these orientations for the future, I just wanted to say that they're really under-researched. Barbara Adams is beginning to do quite a bit of work on this now, and she's just recently published a book called Future Matters, which I would recommend to any of you. But I think the thing about it is they're so significant if we're going to understand the course of biographical and historical change. Who are the pioneers? How do we create a sense of the future and move into it? And this is really important if we're going to understand broader patterns of change. I'm getting towards the end now. Just this idea that we're generating dynamic knowledge, we're linking biography and generation and history together. We're looking into the nature of social change, the strategies used by individuals to create change in their personal lives, and the way that structural conditions impinge upon individuals. And just to draw back and think about a sort of standard sociological conundrum, if you like, the relationship between agency and structure, between human personal lives and the wider social structures of society. In my view, that relationship is essentially dynamic. It is only through time that we can begin to grasp how agency and structure, the personal and the social, the micro and macro, are interconnected and how they come to be transformed. So this is why it's so important that we can build a dynamic element into our thinking. And just to end on a final note, really, it was just to say a little bit more about the dynamics of personal lives in relation to public policy. Because I think if we can bring a dynamic element in, then we provide a counterbalance to objectivised, overgeneralised, static understandings of policy. We're able to rehistoricise our understanding of policy narratives and processes. We can think about the particular aspirations and values that people have, the resources available to them, both material and social, the opportunities and constraints they have. But we needn't think about those in a snapshot. We can actually follow through and see what happens. And I think all of this allows us, if you like, to close the gap between the individual and the social order. It allows for a more humanistic and dynamic understanding, as I've said, between the relationships of personal lives and public policy. And I think I've probably spoke for long enough, so I'm going to stop there, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bren. And I think, as people who have attended ARK seminars know before, it's traditional that we, after the presentation, we have about 20 minutes or so where people can sort of make comments or ask questions, and we can talk about some of the issues. And I think we have quite a few issues perhaps people might want to go into today, so I'll just move the mic over between us. And we can see what interests come up. So perhaps Dirk, would you like to?
Yes, I'm Dirk Schuberts. I work for the ARK project, and 10% of my time on the Your Identity project as well, on biographical work. You haven't really mentioned the interview format, unless I've missed it, that you're using. So I'm interested in that and how people respond to that, being interviewed over and over again, and what interview format are you using. And you said a little bit about how they respond to particular events, significant life events, and how they recreate their biographies. And I can't remember who wrote about that, but I thought it was maybe Paul Atkinson about biography as a performance. And I was wondering whether you work on that as well, and how you respond to the fact that people recreate their biographies over time, basically.
Yes. Yes, I mean, just to take your last point first, I mean, I think that's so interesting. People do story their lives. We all do. We story our lives. But, you know, that story is always in the making, and it's so interesting when you revisit people. And they'll say, actually, you know, when I told you that last time, it really crystallised something for me, but I've come away now and I can see it all in a different light, you know. I mean, it's interesting as a researcher because it means that our data is always provisional. You know, we've never got to the end of things. And of course, we always want to draw conclusions at some point and stop. But, you know, I think it's still very, very valid to think about that notion of storying lives. And, you know, we do create narratives. And I think it's really interesting as well the way people do that differently. Children, when I've interviewed them, don't have a ready-made story, but they'll often get absolutely to the heart of the matter within 2 sentences, which, you know, is just amazing. But this is all linked then to the notion of how we construct people's narratives and so on through an interview process. And I suppose how I would see an interview is that it's a joint construction of meaning and knowledge through a conversation. Again, I think probably most of us that have been out in the field and done qualitative work would think this, that, you know, there are no clear boundaries around collecting data and then going away and analysing. Actually, you're analysing as part of the interview, if you're able to do that. And it's a bit scary, particularly for new researchers, and we'll know that when we're training our younger colleagues. But allowing people to speak and for their agency to come through in the interview is just really important. I mean, certainly when I'm interviewing children, I'll often start by saying, you know, you are the experts in your own lives, and also I'm utterly unshockable and you can tell me whatever you like. And I'm also a bit of a renegade because I never say to children, if you tell me something that worries me, I'm going to go away and tell somebody else. I would never say that. If they did say that, I might then go back and renegotiate with them. But they need a safe space, actually, in order to be able to crystallise their thinking about the circumstances very often. So, that's very general. I mean, I have to say within Timescapes, we've got 7 projects running. It's multidisciplinary. We've got psychologists, we've got oral historians. So we're actually using quite different techniques across the 7 projects. And that has to be the case with qualitative work, that we work in different ways. And just to give you an example there, the oral historians that are part of our study are quite horrified by the idea that we might change people's identities and take out important bits of information. But social scientists will be quite horrified sometimes with oral historians for leaving those facts in, those identifying marks in. So, lots of debates within our team about, what we do about that.
Thank you. Mary Daly, School of Sociology at Queen's, Social Policy and Social Work as well, sorry. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's a really interesting project, really challenging as well. And mine is maybe a theoretical question, really, and in an effort to understand the complexity of what it is you're doing. And when you were talking, I was wondering to what extent is it a study about time, really? To what extent are you problematizing time? And it seemed, I was asking myself the question, is this a study of personal relationships over time, or is it a study of time looked at through the lens of personal relationships? And I'm not sure what it is. Because it seems to me that what you're doing as you describe it, and I know it's only a general description, and you're probably trying to get an umbrella really to link these 7 different, probably very diverse projects together. But I think what it seemed to me you're seeing time in conjunction with, you know, you always talked about like a set of events, really. So it's what happens when and where. So I'm wondering to what extent it is about time, really, and to what extent the project is really problematizing time as one of its primary objectives.
Yes, no, that's a really very, very good question. And I mean, I don't think we've got any clear-cut answers, because what we're doing is very exploratory. And to get to your first point, I think we're doing both here. We're exploring relationships through time and exploring the other way around as well. And it's interesting because we've got some common research questions that run across all of those 7 projects, and they are specifically about those 3 timescapes. So we're asking people across our, you know, I mean, overall we've got a minimum of 400 people taking part in the study, but we're asking them about key turning points in their lives. We're asking them about key historical events that may have impacted upon them. Right, so we're trying to address those sort of broader, you know, temporal processes. But, you know, if you like, the meat of it is about their personal relationships and how they unfold through time. So, you know, we're trying to do both, I suspect, there.
Is it over time, you mean, when you say that?
Yeah, we're revisiting people.
No, I just think there's a difference between saying through time, because through time to me implies through the medium of time, whereas over time to me implies it's a temporal study. There's a temporal dimension to the study, and that I think I found, because they're quite different, really.
They are.
And that I found I was trying to understand.
Yeah. But no, we're definitely doing this tracking of people through time, you know, so that we go back a year later and revisit them, or 18 months later. I mean, you'll know, but I mean, it creates quite a lot of challenges in terms of managing a data set like that, and also working out your analysis, because you need to analyse cross-sectionally at each point in time. You also need to construct case histories that run along, and then you need to compare the different trajectories of lives over time and what happens to them. But I mean, there's some other kind of dimensions of the way that we can work with time. If you think about the archiving side of it, we're bringing together this lovely rich data, and it will be possible for somebody to say, I'm really interested to know about fatherhood, and they could go to that data set and they could draw out from the data set accounts of fatherhood from children talking about what it is like to be fathered and their aspirations for becoming fathers. They'd be able to draw on accounts of first-time fathers going through that process, both before and then after, and then a bit down the line, 5 years down the line, you know, how have they managed to sustain fatherhood or not. They'd be able to draw on accounts from older people talking about what it's like to either father or be fathered later on in life. And that's what, you know, and I would hope out of that you know, we can construct a life course approach to, you know, to fatherhood or motherhood or you know, other kinds of relationships, familial relationships, which I don't think is possible at the moment. So we're very keen on doing that and making sure that the data that is in the archive is, you know, that we've got very refined search engines which enable people to actually search at transcript level to draw out that kind of data.
Sorry, Bren, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm with ARK as well, and I'm particularly interested in the whole archiving dimensions of the project, because ARK was set up to try to open up access to social and political information in Northern Ireland, more around quantitative information. But I know of a number of projects going on across Northern Ireland where, for a region in transition, if you like, from conflict to post-conflict and so on, there are interviews happening with participants, actors, a whole range of people who've been involved in the conflict, in the peace process and so on. And I'm thinking, is there any possibility long-term for the type of archiving dimension that you're generating to be open to other projects? Because qualitative data is a very different sort of archive, and I think what you're trying to do by way of making data more open without having reached the end of the process is really interesting. So I'd be interested in knowing about whether there are any plans about expanding to allowing other data sets in due course.
Yes. I mean, we're in fact, that's one of the mechanisms that we've already built in. How we see it is that we will have a number of affiliated projects coming into Timescapes that would be separately funded, and they would be on themes that would be complementary to the broad themes that we're working with. And those affiliated projects would bring their own data into the archive, but also take data out of the archive in a data sharing model. And we already have, I think, 3 affiliated projects. I mean, we thought it would be really hard work to get people interested, but we've had a constant flow of researchers coming to us saying, I'm really interested in what you're doing, we want to be a part of it, you know. So yes, I think that's absolutely the case. And gradually, as we're going along, I mean, we've got this core interest in, if you like, personal lives and relationships. It needn't necessarily all be about family, but it's also about the life course. It's also about biography and the things that are really important to people. You know, and I can imagine that, you know, I mean, you know, a life story of someone that's been through, you know, these enormous social changes in Northern Ireland. You know, these amazingly important life stories. So yes, in answer to your question, well, I would certainly see us growing in that way.
My name is Michael Strain, and I enjoyed what you had to say very much and look forward to learning more about it through the web. But my question, if it is a question, it's a very tentative one. It's around a term that I noticed didn't seem to be prominent among the quite numerous terms by which you unpacked the idea of timescape. And it's the word practice or practices, daily life practices. Because it seems to me that one of the dangers of biography as a topic, a focus, a kind of way of orienting the thing, is that it emphasizes the personal view of one's own construction of one's own life. And if you stand aside from that, you're immediately conscious of how fallible. And I wondered to what extent your data would be largely personal views untethered by some kind of objectifying construct. And I was particularly encouraged to raise this point when Mary Daly asked hers question about through time and over time. Timescapes, if they're only over time, you know, reliant on the personal view, how much can they be in the data tethered through the objective account of people's practices? I mean, one may think of oneself as a wonderful father, but did one ever actually spend much time practicing it? You know, that kind of thing. And there's a lovely book by De Certo, the practices of daily life, or the practice of daily life, and it's a wonderful conceptual. And I wondered if that would have any value as some kind of alternative tethering point in data collection and perspective in the study.
I think you're right. I mean, that notion of practices I find extremely powerful. How we actually do family life, how we the personal conduct of people in relation to each other is really important. And I suppose I'm drawing there on David Morgan's work about family life. And he wrote, I mean, it's a book called Family Connections, but it's actually flooded through with that notion of family practices and getting to some, if you like, concrete handle on the way that we actually do our relationships. You know, so I think that's just really very important. I mean, basically, when we're out in the field and we're interviewing people, and finding other ways of gathering data as well, because we for example, we give people cameras, we video them, we do walkabouts with them, and you know, so other kind of multimedia ways of trying to capture a life as much as one can. But you know, basically, through people's accounts, we can only really understand things. You know, what we're doing is validating their subjective experiences. So what the objective is in all of that, I don't know, and I'm not quite sure we can ever grasp an objective reality. Okay, so that's a key thing. But I would say that actually we have to understand the subjectivities, and what we as researchers do. You know, if we've got a range of people, we can generalise from across a range of cases And I mean, I think as long as we've got plenty of concrete examples about the way people live. Again, it's not just just individual either. We're really interested in relational lives, linked lives. And in some of the 7 projects that we've got, we're interviewing people across the generations. We're interviewing parents and children, for example, or parents and grandparents. So you can build up pictures of family life through those sorts of mechanisms. I mean, they bring a whole range of other challenges, like the ethics of presenting accounts. From more than one perspective within a family, but nevertheless very worth doing. It's only a sort of partial answer to your question, but...
My name is Marketa Domecka. I'm from Queen's School of Sociology. I would like to ask if you also take into account the impact you have on the people under study, because the mere fact that you interview them and then people know that you are going to come back after some time, and like asking certain questions, you just make people sensitized about certain matters, and by these means you maybe influence people's reflexivity, and you introduce certain concepts, certain questions to their own thinking, and certainly it has certain impact on the people themselves and their biographies. And so do you focus on this as well?
Yes, I think that's it's a good point. I mean, my view there would be that I don't think we can ever do social research without impacting upon people. I mean, maybe it is somewhat enhanced when you're following people through time. Actually, it's a point that you raised as well about what you do about revisiting people. But I was examining a PhD thesis yesterday, and there were great discussions about leading questions. And I always find that people are rather more robust than that. And if you get into what I would call a proper conversation with them, and you say, but isn't such and such the case? And they say, no, you've got it all wrong. They're the expert in their lives. And what you would hope as a skilled interviewer is that you can try to overcome that, so that you're not sort of dictating to them about the kind of answers that they think they should give you, that they are robust and they have their own views on their lives, and that you try and pick up on that. But I mean, I think inevitably, we can't study ourselves without without that being there, and we just have to be aware of the fact and upfront about the fact that we are dealing with subjectivities, and we are reflexive beings ourselves in all of that process, and we have to write about that and acknowledge that too. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Maurice Malvina from the Trail Living Lab in the University of Ulster, incidentally, which is a multidisciplinary living lab, none of which disciplines I would assume intersect with anybody here. We're from computer science and health sciences and business and management and art. I was interested in your phrase dynamic knowledge because in computing science there are researchers who would borrow, I guess, from the phenomenological perspective and talk about knowledge arising from contexts. In pervasive computing, we have these concepts. And I'd like to know if there is a philosophical underpinning to the direction of your research from things like phenomenological perspectives. And the second thing really is quite different. It's much of your research is interview-based. And you talk however, you talk quite a lot about relationships. Mm-hmm. And I would have thought that there would have been a value of having groups in rooms and discussing consensus on reflections on, on reminiscing. And I know that from some of our research on older people, certainly, there's a great value and a great wealth of information comes from putting a group of older people in a room and starting them off and starting discussions off and seeing what comes out of that. And that is great value that you sometimes don't get from the individual interviews. Yes, yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right about... in fact, we do use focus groups quite a lot. Again, all the 7 empirical projects are somewhat different, but they are in there. For example, when I was recruiting for the Young Lives, which is the tracking of a group of 30 young people, I started off by doing focus groups in schools with them.
And in fact, what I did in order to recruit them was showed them, it wasn't just a recruitment exercise, it was actually a consultation about the ethics and practicalities of doing a study over time and how to engage young people in that, the best ways and so on. And I actually did it by showing them clips from the 7-Up films and then asking for their views on them. And it was amazing, the response to that. They were quite adamant about the fact that how could these interviews go around asking such horribly personal questions, and they wouldn't want it to be displayed all over the TV screen. And but they also loved the fact that the young people had been brought together and taken to the zoo. So when we were saying to them, how do we keep young people engaged in the study, they all said, well, we want to go to the zoo. But that was 3 years ago. They're now into other things. But actually that group has a sense of identity as a group, and we have brought those young people together. A year ago we had some extra funding under Social Science, Festival of Social Science, to bring them together, and we did a drama workshop with them. We put displays of their work around the room, because they've done an awful lot of drawings and timelines and other and their photographs and so on. And the drama workshop that was actually run by a professional drama company explored the notion of identity with them, and they constructed their own drama. This is bringing together a group of really very different kids from really highly disadvantaged neighbourhoods and right up to public school kids, and they got a great deal out of the fact that they were together in that process. And then we did a video box at the end where they could evaluate the day but also evaluate the study that they were a part of. And I'd envisaged that they would all go off into the video box in the corner of the room and record their own evaluations, but they all opted to go off in 3s and 4s, and again it was so immediate to have this, the collective around it was just very, very important. So I'd forgotten about that dimension of what we do. With regard to your first question, I'm sure there are all kinds of links between what we do and other sort of ways of viewing the world. One of the things is the links with evolutionary theory or not. We know, for example, that whole notion of causality, which is so important, and people are looking at. But increasingly, we're aware of the fact that we can only understand causality backwards. We have to construct things backwards, and we know that from science. It's a scientific notion. And I was very struck with that. I don't know if any of you will know a wonderful piece of writing by some researchers, Laub and Sampson, and they did a study on delinquent boys. The book was called Shared Beginnings, Divergent Lives, Delinquent Boys Aged 70. And they went back and tracked down a sample of young people who'd been delinquents when they were 15. This was in Boston, in the US. And they followed, I think there were about 200 of them originally, but they managed to follow up about 50 aged 70. And they'd been followed up, over time, 2 or 3 times. But the information that they were able to get from those in-depth interviews at the age of 70 with those men, and basically they were interested to know why it was that some had persisted with a life of crime and some had desisted from a life of crime. And not surprising to me as a family researcher, they discovered that actually personal relationships, the quality of those relationships, was one of the key factors that had enabled these men to move away from a life of crime if they had. But they were able to construct that backwards.
Well, I think we've gone 1 o'clock, and I think it's a very interesting sort of questions and responses to them. So I'd like to thank Bren again for giving us a